Joining me now is House Majority Whip Congressman Steve Scalise, and thank you for joining us. Before we get back to that hearing, when they return, we will take it to you live. Sir, in that soundbite where Peter Strzok talks about his computer, right before that he explained that the lawyers had recommended that change be made, and now looking back he says that apparently is what he did on his computer. What did we learn about this issue of gross negligence and that change?
Well, first of all, the fact that he's trying to claim, Dana, that his political bias against Donald Trump had nothing to do with his ultimate conclusions, that just doesn't pass the smell test. And so I think you saw the smugness of him throughout this hearing. He never once apologized, by the way, for what he did in the text messages. He acknowledged that those text messages were there. Clearly, he's seen the reporting about it. This was his opportunity to go and either explain that wasn't what he said or to apologize, and he did neither, which is very telling.
It is the first time we are hearing from Peter Strzok publicly. He's been behind closed doors as members of the House have been investigating this. Take a listen to what one of your colleagues, Trey Gowdy, had to say during this hearing. He's been a strong voice about this, and he's talking about bias in this soundbite.
Agent Strzok has a most unusual and largely self-serving definition of bias. Agent Strzok, despite the plain language of his texts and emails, despite the Inspector General's report, and despite common sense, doesn't think he was biased. He thinks calling someone destabilizing for the country isn't bias. Agent Strzok thinks saying someone he is allegedly investigating should be elected president 100 million to 0. Before he ever interviews her. He doesn't think that's bias.
So there's a former prosecutor who is obviously frustrated with the FBI and the concerns there. When it comes to bias, can that really be in the eye of the beholder?
Well, I don't think it can be in this case because Agent Strzok was so clear in his text messages how his bias was trying to influence his job. I mean, saying basically, how can we stop Donald Trump from getting elected? And of course, he's in a position to help influence things to carry that out. So, you know, the fact that he was saying it in his emails with colleagues of his, that tells you that his bias wasn't just something he would talk about on a weekend out on a soccer field. This was something he was doing as part of his job as an FBI agent, which is incredibly inappropriate, and he ought to resign.
And he is having a chance for the first time to defend himself in person and in public. Take a look at what happened when Congressman Swalwell, he had an idea that Steve Bannon should have to come and testify since they didn't have a chance to question him. Listen to that.
Mr. Chairman, I move to subpoena Steve Bannon. In our House Intelligence investigation, he was under subpoena. He refused a number of times to answer questions of Mr. Gowdy. Mr. Gowdy appears to have a sincere interest in getting to the bottom of what happened, and so I move under Rule 11 to bring Mr. Bannon to this committee.
The motion is not germane, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings,
I move to table the ruling of the chair.
And so then they had a vote to rule on that. And then I want you to just also take a quick listen to how Democrats reacted after Strzok basically was trying to explain himself. Watch.
The suggestion that I, in some dark chamber somewhere in the FBI, would somehow cast aside all of these procedures, all of these safeguards, and somehow be able to do this is astounding to me. It simply couldn't happen. And the proposition that that is going on, that it might occur anywhere in the FBI, deeply corrodes what the FBI is in American society, the effectiveness of their mission, and it is deeply destructive.
So I used to work on Capitol Hill, and I've covered it for a long time. Have you ever seen members of a committee applaud a witness?
Look, Dana, I think it was embarrassing that the Democrats were trying to be cheerleaders for Agent Strzok, trying to cover for him. And if you saw throughout the hearing, they weren't trying to get to the bottom and get to the facts that the American people want to know about this. They were trying to throw up any kind of roadblocks so that Strzok didn't have to answer questions. That's something that they ought to look at internally in terms of what kind of message that sends to the country that they're trying to cover for this scandal, because this is a major scandal. And look, Dana, the FBI is a critical piece of our national intelligence service, and we want to try to root out the bad apples. And there were bad apples over at the FBI that this investigation has exposed. They should be working with us. The FBI should be working with us to root out the bad apples and instead of trying to cover and be cheerleaders for a very guy who showed his own political bias in putting a complete cloud over this whole investigation and tainting the image of the FBI that frankly deserves a lot better than what they're getting.
We know that Kim Strassel of the Wall Street Journal, a columnist there and on the editorial page, she had this to say as she observed it. In Twitter, she wrote that 90-minute takeaway from Strzok hearing. Democrats have forged new strategy for shutting down oversight. Interrupt, call points of order, argue over points of order, demand recorded votes, eat up time, protect the witness. She said she hopes Republicans are taking notes. I'll give you the last word, sir.
Well, I think, number one, it doesn't bode well on the Democrats' side in the committee for trying to cover for a guy who has been exposed. I mean, we've seen the emails. Everybody's seen the emails, and there's no excuse for it. It's a disgrace to the FBI. It's a cloud over the FBI that everybody ought to be working to clean up. And the fact that the Democrats are trying to be a cheerleader for this guy, is that really the guy that you want to associate yourself with? Do they want Agent Strzok to be the face of what the FBI would be under a Nancy Pelosi speakership? I don't think that's where America is. It's surely not where I am, and I'm glad at least we're trying to get the facts out, even if the Democrats are going to try to obstruct and hide the facts. We're going to keep fighting until we get the facts out.
All right, well, it's always good to talk to you. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise, thank you.
Great being back with you, Dana.